Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the panel today. I'm really pleased to be hosting the panel talking about different strategies and tactics towards a common goal. And I think coalition is something that actually gets talked about a lot and aren't always entirely successful, but I think this is an example of a really successful coalition attempt. I think to have witnessed this in practice on such a kind of controversial, I think, campaign has been really interesting. You know, taking that shared goal and then developing strategies off of that has shown to be something actually I think we could do a lot more of. So I'm just pleased to be hearing from all three speakers today. So in terms of just a brief overview of that original campaign, so it was actually here at VARC in this very room, where Animal Rising announced last year that they were going to campaign against the RSPCA Assurance scheme. And that was a goal of getting them to drop the scheme altogether. And I think it was met with some praise, but also some opposition. And we're hoping to kind of unpack a lot of that journey today. So I'll start off with Ben. And I'd love to know, on the topic of groups kind of coming together, were you looking initially for strategic partners in this initial strategy for the campaign, or did they present themselves to you during the course of the work on the campaign?
So we spoke to loads. So the word coalition, zoom out. Yeah, I hate the word coalition, even though we're about to probably try and create an organisation called the Coalition Against Factory Farming. But the coalitions function very, very annoyingly. And the important thing is alignment around a shared goal. And that was what we focused on, is not worrying about any formal coalitions, is making a compelling, simple and binary goal that people can riff around and do whatever they want. And speaking to people, but before going public with it, there was a long chain of probably about 6 months of speaking to people beforehand, making them getting build-in and buy-in, and then suddenly, once they're actually running, building the structures to absorb people like Layla organised open letter and stuff become much more possible. But I don't know if that's been an interesting answer at all. But
yes, thank you. Good start. Layla, when did you first become interested in being involved in this action, supporting the strategy, and what was your initial kind of campaign idea?
Okay, so is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. I got interested, I think, on the day that Animal Rising's investigation dropped, and when I realised that the media interest was not what we'd hoped it would be, and I felt very personally disappointed because witnessing, reading the investigation report, watching the footage was devastating. And I couldn't understand how more media wasn't interested. And so my colleague Natalie had the idea to write an open letter to the RSPCA and get many pro-animal organizations to sign on to show that it wasn't just Animal Rising, but it was a big part of the movement that really cared about this issue, and to try and build momentum. And when she suggested it to me, I was like, yes, let's do this. And a big part for me that was important was this idea of actually building collaboration. I'd been thinking about this a lot. How do we build collaboration in the movement around a shared goal? And we know that the RSPCA Assured issue is deeply felt in a big part of the movement. Organizations have been campaigning on this for 20 years. There's been over 100 investigations. So it wasn't, it was something that we knew that a lot of people felt strongly about. So I think, that's when I got interested and started work on it. And then the campaign idea was, fundamentally an open letter. We framed ourselves as friends and allies of the RSPCA very strategically, to really try and enter into a respectful dialogue with the RSPCA, but also to encourage lots of organizations to sign on. If we'd been more antagonistic, they wouldn't have. And then secondly, we really wanted to experiment with the idea of centering an individual animal to, sort of, I guess, headline the campaign, and also talk about what we're for rather than what we're against. I hear that these are good narrative sort of practices. So that's why we called it For Charlie. And Charlie was a piglet who was rescued by Animal Rising investigators off one of the farms that they investigated, and is now living her best life in sanctuary. So nice. That was,
Awesome. Thanks, Layla. And over to you, Matthew. Can you tell us at what point you decided to get involved and what spurred you to take the approach that you did?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So, I mean, I was actually minding my own business, not involved at all. And Layla rang me up and said, you know, she was going to be running sort of more of a friendly sort of approach with the open letter and everything. And that maybe like having a good cop, bad cop scenario might work. So she encouraged me to do something a little bit edgier. Between us, I mean, you were helping a lot in the background, and Natalie. So we created something called welfarewashing.com, was it, or .org? Created a website. We put quite a lot of information about what Animal Rising had been doing. And specifically, I went into one of the RSPCA farms. We did some filming. And similar to a previous video that we'd put out, a KFC video where we'd showed their advertising compared to the reality, we decided to do the same thing with RSPCA. So we sort of flipped between their advertising and the reality, and tried to then create a conversation around the term welfare washing. And we then ran some posters on the London Underground, and that campaign generated about 50,000 website views. Great. So we didn't really do a great deal of advertising. This is 50,000 people that saw it on the underground, on the train carriages, and went to the website and looked at the information. Wow. So I thought that was pretty good. Yeah. So that was my background. So I was sort of doing my own thing, and I think the idea was, there was going to be a multi-pronged approach with various different groups and activists all doing the same thing. So that's how I got involved.
Yeah, nice. And so from your perspective, Ben, and Animal Rising's approach, do you feel like doing that kind of initial heavy lifting of like choosing the target, going against a big already established animal welfare group, how much of that heavy lifting do you think you need to do for a campaign to feel attractive enough for others to get involved? Like Layla's saying, it was the press that was kind of interesting for her and wanted to push that further. Do you think other groups would have targeted something like the RSPCA if you hadn't have kind of been the catalyst for that?
I will answer that question in a second, but I thought maybe it might actually be helpful just to give a very, very quick overview for people here who, I don't think everyone sort of spends their life following what happens in the RSPCA campaign. So maybe I might just...
Yeah, please, yeah.
So the RSPCA campaign that started last year for the campaign was launched by Animal Rising for the RSPCA to drop the RSPCA Assured scheme, which is a farm certification scheme which covers like, 50% of egg-laying hens, 25% of pigs, pretty much all salmon, and also for the RSPCA to support plant-based transition. Part of that, we did the biggest farm investigation in the UK, and that was released in June, and then put Wallace on King Charles's face on a portrait that temporarily knocked the Conservative manifesto announcement off the top UK spot for 2 hours. And then later on did slaughterhouse investigations. 3 slaughterhouse investigations. Lots of people piled in. Chris Packham was their president. He resigned. Brian May was their vice president, resigned. Caroline Lucas, their vice president, resigned. The CEO resigned. The head of policies resigned. And now the head of the chair of the board has left as well. So it was pretty brutal. Of accidentally decapitated. So it did start to feel a little bit like you've gone into a secondary school kid, gone to primary school and beaten someone up. I think that it was a real challenges of running a nuanced campaign of the narrative we were doing in terms of the hero's journey. It was a hero who lost their way, but that was quite hard for a lot of people to understand. So maybe we didn't communicate it very well. So found ourselves, it was very hard, very, very hard campaign for everyone to run because we're not trying to destroy the RSPCA. We were trying to transform them. Part of transformative conflict is, of course, you're trying to transform your opponent or your target, but you also must transform yourself, and there also must be reconciliation at the end.
Yeah.
And that's what this panel's all about. Or was supposed to be about, at least. And to your question, though.
So in terms of being like the catalyst, doing that initial heavy lifting.
The people had been doing things about it, but I don't think there's an equivalent campaigning vehicle in the UK that can do such the heavy, high-risk taking, heavy lifting to actually make an issue salient or a number one news story or potentially a number one news story. So we really came to understand our role of the most high functioning, I think, the future of big coalitions. It's having an organization that It's just a campaigning machine that can take the risk, look bad, then other people can get involved in different ways. Well, hopefully you don't have to look bad, but anyway, yeah, I think without that, most coalitions waffle. Yeah.
Nice. Official term. Layla, how did your approach differ from the work of Animal Rising? So Ben summarised that there. Was it important that your approach covered different ground compared to what Animal Rising were doing?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, we couldn't do what we did without Animal Rising's investigations and the liberation of Charlie. But as Ben was saying, the role that we see Animal Rising taking is the catalyst role, and then that provides opportunity for the rest of the movement to then leverage. And as I was sitting there watching very little media coverage of the first investigation, I was like, do we have the capacity to respond to this massive opportunity? And so our role, and it was for the For Charlie campaign, was to see if we had that capacity and really try and bring people together to respond to the opportunity and to the sort of trigger event, I suppose, of the UK's largest investigation that's ever happened. Yeah. And then in terms of approach, yes, we didn't want to be as edgy, I suppose, as Animal Rising. We really wanted to get to be that middle ground, friends and allies. We really wanted to, I think our emphasis also was on the narrative piece. We really wanted to frame the conversation away from welfare and cruelty to move towards a conversation about animal freedom. Centering Charlie was part of that. I think Animal Rising's investigations showed the nightmare, and Charlie's story showed the dream of animals thriving. And I forgot to say that we also commissioned a film from BAFTA award-winning director Alex Lockwood, a short film that centered the story of Charlie, but also interviewed insiders. And there was very powerful testimony from a former RSPCA board member, Jane Tredgett, and Dr. Alice Brough, a former pig industry vet, that we sort of thought of as the heart of the campaign, and then the open letter was kind of the head of the campaign. And then I think the other thing we wanted to also bring was, the messaging had been very much around drop the scheme, but without, and also actively promote a plant-based transition. Like, there were two parts of the ask, and so we kind of, the second part was dropped because of media and sound bites and all the rest of it, so we wanted to bring that as well. Right. And then fundamentally it was the collaboration piece. There was a lot of work, one-to-one calls, meetings. We had calls with like over 20 organizations, sharing information, sometimes discussing next steps when appropriate. And the first two calls were really about what is our goal. So Ben mentioned the importance of a shared goal, but the Assured scheme wasn't really, I think, ultimately the goal that we wanted to go for. It was dissociate from the scheme, because the fundamental issue, for us at least, is not so much the existence of welfare schemes, but the legitimization of animal farming by the world's oldest, largest animal charity. This is deeply problematic. So dissociate from the scheme, stop legitimizing it with your marketing, and promote a plant-based transition. And instead of the scheme, focus on lobbying for mandatory labeling. So I think all of those things were part of our approach that sort of evolved over time.
Yeah. Nice.
Can I just say, internally, no one listens to me. Because within Animal Rising, because I wanted to disassociate, but it ended up being dropped. So in retrospect, I turned out to be right. So
oh no, this is.
But that was an internal. It was even hard internally to get alignment on that. But there was some of us who wanted to disassociate. It ended up being dropped. Looking back, that wasn't a good decision.
That's good. Good reflection. And Matthew, in terms of your approach then, did you feel like that was also complementary to the campaign or something completely independent? How involved were you?
I think I was pretty much leading the charge on LinkedIn from
sure.
memory.
That's your domain.
Yeah, so I was trolling Chris Sherwood, I was trolling Emma Slewinski. You mentioned that Chris Sherwood, the CEO, stepped down. I'm not clear that was as a result of our campaign. I think he got a job at the NSPCC, but I don't know whether or not he'd had enough and started looking elsewhere. So I guess we'll never know on that. But one thing that happened after he announced that he was stepping down was people kept saying to me, Matthew, you should apply for the job. And I was like, yeah, funny, you know. And then I thought, actually, maybe I should. So to begin with, it was just like, I thought I'll do it as a joke, you know. Vegan applies for RSPCA CEO role. And then, you know, I started going through the application process and looking at what the job entailed. I thought, actually, wouldn't it be a great job for a vegan to be running the RSPCA? So I actually went through the process and sent in my application. And I got a phone interview. Now, bear in mind, I'm not really experienced in interviews because I've been like running my own things for like 30 years. So the last job interview I went on was at Fast Eddie's, which was a pizza delivery job. And I only got that job because I had a car. And I did mention this in my phone interview for the RSPCA job, that I've got a car.
But it didn't cut it, unfortunately.
No. I mean, I had a really good chat. It was with a recruiter. I didn't get through to the final stages. And to be honest, I think they just were going through the motions. The guys applied.
Give him a chance.
He might say something on LinkedIn if we don't put him through the process. So I had a nice chat, but then I got a very polite no thanks. But that was good. So I was just doing my own thing and trying to put the pressure on LinkedIn pretty much.
Yeah.
But I understand they haven't so far hired anybody, so I'm still available. I can start tomorrow if they want.
Good to know. Ben, do you feel like this collective approach was obvious from the RSPCA perspective? Do you think they were aware that they were getting pressure from all different angles? I know you had some conversations with them. Was it apparent to them that there was different strategies at play?
Well, I think that they knew, obviously, they're not idiots, there's some level of coordination, but the idea is that you want multiple different voices. I often say that no one cares what we've got to say, and they shouldn't. It's very obvious we've got an agenda. In an ideal world, because Chris Packham was doing a thing for Charlie, Matthew, and lots of other organizations. In a dream world, a campaign should be having lots of organic voices saying things in their own way, and this is something we learned a lot. So I say, this year coming up, some say we shouldn't get a single TV interview. Because it's having, So I don't know if they maybe they didn't. I don't know. There were lots of different people. There was just a lot of random stuff happening. We even did posterings. So 250 different groups ordered posters and covered the whole country in posters. They obviously knew that was to do with us. People going to branches. I don't know that. I think it's obvious. It was largely coordinated, but tried our best. For example, the decision with the open, Layla and I, for example, we had a conversation about the open letter, and it's it was clearly, we made the decision, we shouldn't, it's much better us not being directly involved in these sorts of things.
Right. And
because we're not best placed. So I don't know if I'm answering your question here. I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Please, yeah.
When we got into a back and forth with the RSPCA, and the first response after the open letter was very collegiate. It was very much from your colleagues at the RSPCA. Oh. Okay, very nice. And then For Charlie really did get going, and the ads on the underground got going, and then featuring Charlie. And then We the Free did a big event with outreach using the For Charlie film, and various other things were happening. Now, this wasn't coordinated by For Charlie. I mean, people within the sort of quote-unquote informal coalition were doing this, and I love that we were all in contact, and there were ideas emerging because of that connection. Anyway, the next interaction with the RSPCA was, we are not meeting with you until you stop targeting us with your adverts and your activism. Aww. And our activism was behind a computer. We weren't doing that, but I think it was all seen from their perspective as at that point a coordinated thing, which I think is a lesson. How do we position ourselves if we want to stay in the kind of middle ground of friends and allies, but then have this broad approach behind us? And this is a question I haven't answered yet.
Sure. Is it like a hindrance, do you think, sometimes, Ben, when you have like that initial strategy and a sense of how you want it to play out, and then you open it up for others to become involved? Obviously, coalitions are formed, which on the face of it feels really positive, but then perhaps the message is taken in like a different direction. Is there like any hesitancy to wanting to encourage more people to be involved?
No, it was great. But the problem was the design of the campaign itself. So we're wrapping up the RSPCA campaign, and we're focusing. We've done some more internal. We were actually planning to put out comms before coming to VARC, but didn't get around to it. So just dealt with it internally in our WhatsApp community chats. But anyway, we're wrapping up the RSPCA campaign partly because it wasn't a perfect campaign. It was a very hard campaign to run. It was a very hard goal to get alignment on, with lots of nuance and detail, and that actually made it hard to pile in people. There was very limited scope for how many people could meaningfully work on it in lots of different ways, right, and in very varied ways. It was basically ended up being a bit of a national drama and scandal. It was basically and a bit of inside game chatting and a few investigations, and then we campaigned at 100 RSPCA branches as well. But yeah, I think it was the trouble with it. It was a bit limited in scope for how people could participate with their own theories of change. So I think that's like a lesson to be built into future designs, is a much more, a goal that there are many more expansive ways to work towards it. So I think that was the only problem with it, but people piling in was, great.
Just add one thing. I think narrative unity is something that's really important. So people doing lots of different tactics and strategies, but having some kind of unity around the narrative is really, really important. We tried to do that with Charlie, created a comms guide for all the signatories of the open letter. I don't know how well we did it, but I think that's something that's really important going forward.
Yeah. And so even though RSPCA are, Animal Rising are wrapping up, like you were saying, having been a catalyst, there is still opportunity for other groups to carry that message forward in whatever way they want to kind of manifest that as it works forward. I feel like it's a good demonstration of one group being that catalyst, and then potentially lots of messages moving forward.
And I just said we weren't the first ones to do it either. Like lots of people been like Animal Justice Project, Viva. Well, a load of other people have said this, a very similar message in the past. I just think that, it just wasn't built in the same sort of way, or it didn't get the same reach. So we didn't. There's no such thing as originality. So anyway, so.
Layla, how important do you think it is to stay connected and in contact with all of the strategic partners in a campaign of this scale? Ben's kind of talked about the complexities there. Is there a point at which you think a big campaign can and needs to branch off into like different theories of change, different strategies to take it forward?
I think both of those are really important. I think the fundamental thing that I think I've learned and have read about coalitions or groups is building trust, building connection, building those relationships, because then when those conflicts, disagreements, ideological things happen, and they inevitably will, the whole thing will crumble if you don't have that trust in those relationships. So I think that's a really important piece. I think having the shared goal is really important, and then a narrative unity, and then having, and then everybody can do what they do best with their own theories of change, with their own strengths. But I think staying in connection with, information flow so that coordination can happen organically, because everybody understands the context, everybody understands what's happening when, and then we can self-organize. And that is what happened with, it wasn't like a coalition where it was, this is what we're doing and everybody's in lockstep. There was no kind of, like timeline or planning, but things emerged organically because we were updating each other and we were in touch regularly. So that felt like a really good way. And what I would like to experiment with going forward is how can we build not just these sort of like individual coalitions that form and then disappear around particular things, but can we take a network-based approach? Can we actually develop a network in the movement where everybody is connected, everybody knows what they're doing, what everybody else is doing, and collaborations emerge organically? So taking a kind of living system approach rather than this kind of kind of disjointed approach that's happening now. But I think, we're going to be working on this going forward. So watch this space.
Nice. Matthew, do you feel like there is an opportunity, and do we do this well in the UK currently? Do you feel as though there is space for coalitions to work successfully?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a good pilot scheme. I think we'd all agree that we didn't do everything perfectly, and there's lessons to be learned from the campaign against the RSPCA. Yeah, I mean, all of the reading that I've done around, how social change happens, you really need collaboration between groups. You really need collaboration between activists. It's how those networks interact with each other. I have a strong belief that animal freedom movement can actually sort of take off from the UK internationally. I believe that we're not there yet, but I think we can organize ourselves if we collectively want to do so. So, I'm working in the background on ways that we might sort of achieve that. I think the UK, London specifically is sort of a strong enough city that where you get ripple effects. If we can make change there, that ripple effects into the UK. But also the UK has this sort of global influence and this soft power, if you like, that if we can, really make meaningful change here, then it could spread. I think if we can organize ourselves and lead us, in terms of narratives, and that is then adopted elsewhere, I think that could really help. So I think, RSPCA, I mean, we're not finished with the campaign. You mentioned that maybe Animal Rising are stepping back, but there's still people working in various different ways. There's a guy called Simon Potts that's put in a complaint to the Charity Commission. Unfortunately, it was immediately rejected, but now he's looking at a legal challenge on that so that they will prioritize it.
So this is like a complaint against, almost like reporting the RSPCA to the Charity Commission to say they're failing on their charitable objectives.
Exactly, yes. Okay. I can't remember exactly, but there's 3 main sort of topics.
Okay.
And a lot of it is around the welfare washing and sort of working with the industry that's actually exploiting animals. I think there's an ASA complaint as well. Layla might know more about that. So yeah, I'm waffling a little bit, not as much as Ben, but
second place, 1, 2, 3, all good.
But hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. Ben, was there ways in which you hoped that other potential partners would get involved that didn't materialize? Maybe the press, you could say, as like a partner, but is there anything else that comes to mind in terms of potentials that you hoped would happen that didn't?
No, I think it had all the components. The big thing is having the well-loved public figures, so coming on the team. So Chris Packham is Brian May and Caroline Lucas.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, it's the synergy between having high power campaigns with I think that's the key ingredient. It's got some of the organizations, but the public don't care about them. Well-loved public figures being the heroes of the story, and the drama, because I think that went really well, and it's a stepping stone, because that's the key, is how do you get those more senior public figures on board, and when people see, we've had other people reach out to, so we've done that first layer of celebrity and notable engagement, and when people publicly see, Mark the vet, he's a really nice guy, but he reached out to us now, because he sees that Caroline Lucas and Brian May and Chris Packham supported us. So there's a layer of, once you start eating up the chain of celebrity support, and people say you're okay. So I think it was great, really. I don't think there was anything. It all came together into something that was just more coherent enough as a test run. So I would say that was great, and can build on it.
Great. One criticism of this approach that I think keeps coming back, and there's questions in the already on Hoover about this, is targeting an NGO that feels like kind of inside, maybe one of us, and not the industry standards. For example, there's obviously Red Tractor, different targets you could have gone after. And obviously we're talking about collaboration here today, but it was targeted against an animal group. Ben, do you still feel as though that was the right approach? Do you have any kind of commentary on that common disagreement?
I learned a hell of a lot from really trying to break trying to break something, you really learn how it works. It was news to me that the RSPCA was part of the animal movement at the time. I think I think I've come to appreciate though. This is the nature of transformative conflict. You get to know each other, and for example, I'm better friends. We're really in Animal Rising League, so we're really good friends, despite what people. Everyone's just like crying wolf about. Well, maybe it's not crying wolf, but complaining about infighting. We're actually much better friends. For example, really good friends with Compassion and Humane League, and even many. Well, the RSPCA doesn't really have any leadership, but making up with the people who've been leaving. And
After the fact, that's
and
great.
when they have new leadership, we'll be really good friends with them. So I think for us, the strategy was that the RSPCA campaign was a vehicle through which to create, to transform the RSPCA, the animal movement, and society as a whole. And I think there've been a lot of slightly mystical and nuanced benefits to the campaign. So no, I think it was a good decision. We made a lot of mistakes. The tone was wrong sometimes. It was raggedy when we were going to the branches. Ended up being a bit intense and a bit horrible. Like people going to campaigning at the branches. There were all sorts of things we did which we'd learn from. But I can't even remember what the question was.
That's okay.
I mean, the infighting sort of accusation really was a shock to me because, I saw the RSPCA as certainly not an animal group. They're a dog and cat charity, let's be frank, and over 99% of animals that are currently being exploited in this country are farmed animals. And, they're really not doing very well at protecting those farmed animals. So, I still see them as being part of the status quo, part of the system, really. So, I don't buy that infighting personally.
Lela, do you have views on it?
Yeah, I agree with Ben, surprisingly. No, not surprisingly. Just this idea of transformative conflict being so important and sort of framing things as infighting when actually we are trying to transform to a better place. And ultimately, we were asking the RSPCA to unite with us. I think that's the way to frame it. We were asking them to lead the way to a plant-based future.
Right.
So I think you can frame it however you like, depending on your perspective. But we ultimately wanted, as Ben said, reconciliation after the conflict and for the movement to be in a better place, because fundamentally we do believe that what they're doing is holding us back as a movement and us back as a society. The society has moved forward since the Assured scheme started, which I'm sure was completely well intended. But over 50% of people now are saying that they want to reduce meat consumption. It's like, why don't we, go with that rather than, promoting the Assured scheme? So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And maybe in terms of outcomes then, so Matthew, what would you classify as the kind of outcome of your approach? And is there anything you wish you'd done differently?
No, not particularly. I think it was a really good sort of test case, really, about collaboration between groups. So I think, whereas, of course, we could have done things better and differently. Personally, I struggled because I was doing so many other things that I wasn't able to dedicate enough time to do it. Just, the website, welfarewashing.org, if you have a look at it, it could be better, to be honest. I think we live and learn, so I think I'm super positive about how we collaborated, and I think we're in a bit of a lull at the moment where the management's changing. So I think we could always come back to this. The inside game thing, it may very well be that if collectively we're giving putting less pressure on, they might step back, and there was a suggestion that because we were putting so much pressure on, that was actually hindering progress, which I'm not sure that's the case. But if that was the case, then let's see if that progress happens. And if not, maybe we can go back and chat with them a little bit more.
Yeah, go again.
Yeah.
Ben, you talked about some mystical outcomes, I think was the word you used. I'd love to know more about what some of those were.
The infighting quickly, actually, though, one of the things, although the RSPCA maybe wasn't, there were loads of people who work in welfare organisations, particularly from effective altruism, who reached out to loads of funders who don't fund us, reached out to us, being like, can you not run this campaign? So it generated a lot of debate in the, I think, really great, worthwhile debate. So these are some linked to some of the mystical outcomes. So, for example, it's not entirely mystical, but we went on, for example, I went on your podcast with James talking about the RSPCA campaign and understanding the nuance. Then Lewis Bollard wrote an article about, he's one of the big funders in America, which the Americans keep applying what happens in America to the UK. We're not infighting the same way. We've got a way healthier ecosystem than the US.
Back off.
Yeah, I know. Coming over here trying to tell us what's what. But the end result is, I mean, I learned a huge amount of the nuance of, I think it's broken down from anyone running the traditional division, this welfare, this tired, we really accidentally stepped in the abolitionist versus welfare is doo-doo. There's like this argument from the 1990s. But I think many people who would have fought that out, I can only speak for myself. I learned a huge amount, yeah. And I think many people who would have supported this blanket division between, because there was previously two parallel streams of the animal movement functioning. There's like the welfare organizations doing things like, there's some amazing, like the Humane League doing amazing work with better chicken commitment and whatever, and lots of people doing that. And then there were the old welfare groups like the RSPCA who aren't trying to end animal farming, but they're trying to, let's just make it a little bit nicer. The animal rights groups. But I think a lot of it forced all of these people to swirl around the nexus of this conversation was, these are parallel streams, but they overlapped in the RSPCA Assured scheme, because the RSPCA runs meat adverts. Obviously, it legitimizes to some extent meat consumption and will boost some level of consumption. At the same time, there are some where there are welfare benefits as part of the welfare strategy. So it's the nexus where these two strategies, there's a welfare strategy at the cost of the meat reduction strategy. So it forced everyone to have a fight about it on LinkedIn, and in the public and in conversations, and now. And I think it's enabled everyone to have a much more nuanced perspective. Yeah, and I'd say, yeah, I strongly support personally things like mandatory government labeling, control of imports, and trying to understand, felt a real burden to try and understand a coherent welfare strategy, because we were dumping all over the existing one.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that will be reflected in our strategy and comms going forwards. So yeah, it's not that mystical.
I will just do a quick plug because Ben mentioned it, not mine, but there's an episode where on the podcast that I co-host called How I Learned to Love Shrimp, and we've interviewed Matthew before as well, Matthew and Jane, and yeah, Ben, it was an excellent episode actually with Ben going into lots of detail on the strategy behind the RSPCA campaign if you're not kind of caught up until this point. So yeah, shameless plug there. Layla, same sort of response to you about outcomes.
So I think one tangible outcome was that we managed to generate quite a significant amount of mass media attention, to our surprise. I think some mystical things happened there in terms of, I think the RSPCA, we told the RSPCA that we were going to release an open letter, so they preempted it by releasing news about their external review. Got it into the BBC, and so we'd already been talking to them, so that included the open letter and this coalition of 60 animal groups, and we were like, yes, we're not, but that's amazing. And so then we got this exclusive about the open letter. So there was a lot of mass media coverage, and then Brian May, we'd sent it to Brian May, and we'd sent the film to Brian May, and he watched it and basically signed the letter and then promptly resigned. And in his resignation letter cited the For Charlie campaign, and posted our film on his Instagram with 3.4 million followers. So that got a massive amount of views to the film and our website. So that was a sort of tangible outcome in terms of media. And I think, but the more important thing, as we've all been talking about, is just building the capacity for collaboration. Like, I'm really happy about how this all came together. It wasn't planned, it was very reactive, but I think it was based on the fact that we're all very well connected and we trust each other and we're friends, and I think we brought a lot of friends together. So I think that's really wants to build on that going forward. Yeah,
nice.
I think we did have an effect on the RSPCA. I understand that they took meat recipes off the website. I mean, the fact that there's an animal charity that's promoting meat on the website was crazy, but I think they've pulled that. I think they've stopped serving animals in their canteen. I don't know if that's totally related to this, but they started talking about doing more spot checks and a lot more. So from a welfare perspective, I'm an abolitionist, of course, but that there's it may very well be that over the next year or two, standards might start to improve as a result of the work that we were collectively doing.
Can I just add one thing? That was reminded me. I think their messaging has also become more progressive. I think the CEO started talking very explicitly about we need to end the farming animals in the future, kind of thing. So, I agree. I think that the whole campaign has shifted them, and hopefully will continue to. And meat reduction, and then the plant-based strategy that's going to be coming out. Maybe Ben can talk to that. I don't know.
I was just going to say, what you're saying, they increased farm visits from one on the welfare side from 1 a year on average to 3 a year was part of the review, because they did their own review after all the drama. So on the welfare side, I mean, that's happened. Yeah, they implemented 100% plant-based catering in internal and external events. Yeah, removed meat advert off their meat recipes off their website. They primetime slaughterhouse footage was shown on primetime TV. It was a number one news story several times, including and resulting slaughterhouse was shown on primetime TV. So there's also non-mystical things which happened as well.
And this is great because sometimes there is kind of a huge goal, isn't there, like getting them to drop or disassociate from the assurance scheme. But actually, just because you haven't necessarily achieved that yet doesn't mean there isn't some smaller goals on the way there and some smaller wins that we can all celebrate. Because I think when you're working in a coalition, having some, if we're all just waiting for animal liberation, it's quite depressing in the day-to-day. So when we get these smaller steps towards that freedom, I think that does encourage more people to get involved and feel excited about the campaign. So thinking about the future then, before we go into questions, so just a quick reminder there to pop your questions into the app if you've got anything that you'd like to ask any of the panel. Thinking about the future then, so Matthew, how are you moving this forward? Are you going to remain involved? Is there anything you're hoping to do in the future?
I mean, I mentioned London previously. I'm working with some of the funders and also starting to speak to stakeholders about putting a real, throw the kitchen sink at London in terms of activity, really trying to bring all of the theories of change together simultaneously and try and prove that we can actually make progress in a place. And I think London is the right place. Talking about creating a co-working space and maybe a command center where, we can, people can come in for a day or a couple of days or 5 days a week to a central location. A lot of conversations happen around the water cooler, apparently, and great things happen there. So let's stimulate that. We started to, Layla and I were at an event yesterday with some of the UK leaders, which is great, but having that once a year is not enough.
Yeah.
We need this to be a continuous collaboration because we are all ultimately on the same team. But when we go back and work in our organizations, we tend to get in our own silo and we're maybe fighting for the same pool of funding. And, so I think we can do better. I think we can organize ourselves. And that's one thing that I'm really keen to help stimulate over the next few months.
Nice, thank you. Ben, do you want to talk about the future for this campaign from Animal Rising?
Yeah, so the Animal Rising portion, and just to remind us, so we become this sort of Animal Rising we have Animal Rising, we have a load of plant-based campaigns, for example, like plant-based universities, which is scaling across Europe, and then we have farmer stuff like Vegan Support the Farmers and some other farmer things going on. So we don't know what to call this central node. We sometimes call it the network, but anyway. The Animal Rising portion, so Rose is actually giving a talk at 4 p.m. on Sunday about the direction, and we're going to be focusing on factory farms, particularly new factory farm applications. Linked to that, we can be doing it's always got to be the biggest, the world's biggest farm investigation, and then trying to scaling up running campaigns to fight applications, because currently over 90% of factory farming applications get approved, and that number needs to come down to zero first. So anyway, that's going to be our focus going forwards, and scaling that up, in the national level with investigations, and probably creating another organisation to fight all of the planning applications, because animal rising isn't a very good vehicle for that, because local people do not like wouldn't like that.
And Layla, what about you?
Yeah, so for the campaign, I think we've mentioned that there's an interim CEO in place, but it's going to take at least, 6 months or more for the new permanent CEO to be appointed. So we're in a bit of a pause period. But what we would like to do is, once the new CEO is in place, and we've got some sort of inside tracks to kind of really advocate for us to meet with them and to meet with the board and really make our case for the proposal that we've already sent to the RSPCA, but they were not that interested, but which we think is a very constructive proposal: disassociate, lobby for mandatory labelling, promote a plant-based future, and we've sort of helped to kind of create the roadmap for it. So I think the team Charlie is still going to be, working behind the scenes, and as Matthew said, there's other things going on. So watch this space, but maybe not in the next 6 months.
I love that this is going to be on their desk as they start the job, like CEO,
welcome.
Day 2.
Hi. And then just to say, I think one of the sadnesses, I suppose, for me is that we probably don't have the power in the movement to have made the sort of drop the scheme thing a reality, because we don't have that decentralized grassroots people power network. And I feel like that is something that me and my team at Project Phoenix are going to be working on. And then secondly, this collaborative attempt with For Charlie is such a great foundation to build what I talked about earlier, sort of more network-based approach. So we're going to be working on building a network of NGOs connected to a network of grassroots groups that actually can support each other's campaigns and really become a force for change.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's a nice optimistic end. So thank you to all of the panels. I'm going to go, the panelists, I'm going to go to some questions now. And the first one is from Aidan. Did you expect the RSPCA to drop the scheme? Was that kind of like an initial assumption? And if not, or as they haven't, why is it that you've decided to wrap up the campaign?
First question of did we actually expect them to drop it? I think the deeper we got into the weeds, there's the RSPCA's the welfare strategy, and the RSPCA for now I don't feel like they've got an alternative route for a welfare strategy. There's motivated vegans, well there certainly were in the RSPCA who believe in it, and so there are people who genuinely I think that the idea that how sold out, for example, that people are they're doing it for money or revenue, that's not the only reason. Yes, it's a massive organization with inertia, but there's genuine ideological belief in it as a strategy, and there are mission motivated vegans who believe in it. And that was the more deeper we got in. So that's one of the things that I think that's why they're not going to drop it. And I think, or totally drop it, because then their whole strategy, their farm animal is less but better. That is the RSPCA's farm animal strategy. They said to us, because we had several meetings with them, they don't have a less strategy at the moment, which is reduce meat consumption, the plant-based transition stuff. But they're working on that, and hopefully that should come out soon. But the better side of it, how they operationalize their welfare strategy, was the Assured scheme. And they're not just going to drop it, because then they don't have a functional farm animal welfare strategy at all. So yeah, they need to change. There's like fundamental things of the legitimization, the marketing, obviously the bits which wind everyone up. But the core of it, they're cranking up standards with the farms animals who are on the part of the scheme, and until they have an alternative, for example, like if they are campaigning for mandatory government labelling, for example, something to totally support them on. So that's why they haven't dropped it, I think. And the deeper into the weeds we got, the deeper, they'd even be considering dropping the salmon, I think, for example, but they realise they're going to be sued by all the salmon industry. So,
yeah,
so it's
tricky.
So large bureaucracies move slowly, we discovered.
Sure.
And what was the second part?
And so why have you decided to wrap up the campaign? We've maybe touched on that.
Because we feel they don't have they don't have a CEO or head of policy, so they can't make any decisions for the next 6 months. This is also why Chris Packham, for example, resigned, because he said there's no one to even speak to.
Right.
Number two, yes, the opportunity cost, because yes, we could keep ploughing on with the RSPCA campaign, but strategy is all about focus, and if we can't focus on the RSPCA and scale up something else at the same time. We're a campaigning organisation, and things, when you get all the arrows pointing in the same direction, with a few distractions, is when you can have a really big impact. So for us, we've got to make a choice of what we focus on, and we think there's a long runway. We can build something. We want to stop. We keep building a machine. Each year we build this unique machine, whether it's delaying the Grand National or blocking up the dairy distribution centres or whatever it is, and then collapsing it and building it again the next year. And we built the big investigation machine. And we want a long timeline, which will go on for 2-3 years and beyond, of where we can run with something. And that's not the RSPCA campaign. And we don't keep folding things because we quit. I mean, we fold things because we keep designing campaigns which don't genuinely have multi-year longevity to them.
Yeah.
It runs out of road. And that's what we're focused on, is designing a strategy at the moment which we can actually run and actually where we're stronger the year after, where we'll be stronger and further along next year than we are this year, and then stronger the year after that.
Sure.
And we just, for us, we're building genuine people power, like on the ground. And there was the RSPCA campaigns, not that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Maybe for Layla or Matthew, have you run any post-campaign public surveys to see what the general sentiment is now of the Assured scheme, given the scale of the coverage? I think you spoke a little bit about some, like maybe some meat reduction ideas that have changed. Do you plan to run anything like that to test the messaging?
Not specifically, no. Yeah, that's my answer, no.
Matthew, do you ever run anything like that? Once you've done like a underground campaign, do you then follow that up with like a public opinion survey or anything?
The answer is also no from my side. No, we don't have any plans in that regard.
Sure. Okay. I did accidentally mark one of the questions that was highly voted as answered, so it's disappeared. If it's your question and you want to raise your hand and you saw me do that, please let me know, because I feel bad that I did that. Apologies, technical error. I'll go to the next one, unless, yeah, okay. What do you see as the main barriers to aligning animal welfare organisations with veganism?
Is that specifically in terms of the RSPCA? I mean, what I would say for them is that one of the things they came back with was that they are the last line of defence, and if they were to pull the RSPCA Assured scheme, then it would be worse for animals. That was something that we didn't buy. And to the previous question, my view in terms of whether or not I saw it being successful was no. I didn't think we had any chance of RSPCA dropping the scheme, but I thought there might be a chance that they may take the name off it, and it would just become some sort of general welfare assurance. So the people are not losing the jobs, and there still is that work getting done, but without the name attached to it.
Is that what you meant by disassociation?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also there's it's not just the name, there's also governance links and legal links between RSPCA and RSPCA Assured. So RSPCA Assured, RSPCA board members are on the RSPCA Assured board. So just properly dissociate. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Layla, this one's for you. You mentioned moving towards having a method in which organisations can all stay informed with one another to better collaborate and unite in the shared narrative. Do you have an idea of what this might look like?
Oh, it's still very much in conceptualization, but I've been very influenced by a book called Impact Network. So there's networks that have done this. I think this book covers 50 networks that bring together all the different parts of a complex system into some kind of, it will be some kind of communication platform, but also have regular physical convenings to build trust, to build connection. And then, collaborations emerge too. For example, a bunch of groups might be focusing on, a factory farming moratorium, and another might be focusing on, but I think the point is, it's like we're currently just sort of only know what our own particular part of the ecosystem is doing. And I think mystical and magical things happen when all of those different parts are connected and new and exciting ideas emerge, that we can get to sort of the nexus of, or the overlaps between, all of our shared goals. So I don't have a concrete vision, but it's forming, and I think it's going to be very great.
Yay. Nice. Some of the questions I feel like we have responded to, so I'm gonna go to some that I think maybe haven't. Why do you think so? Ben, you mentioned that we had the people on the board resign, Chris Packham, Caroline Lucas, the CEO left, we know that other members of staff left. Why do you think that wasn't enough to get the demand met?
Well, one of the challenges the RSPCA have that we discovered is the board. So it was all very well trying to get this, whether or not the CEO or head of policy agreed with us. We found that they had a board, which was actually where key policy decisions are made. It's a very large board of 12, which you can actually get every AGM, 3 new ones get elected to. So this AGM will be October, so hopefully you can try and get some new people elected to the board.
Matthew, new role.
But that was one of the hardest things of the decision makers. The presidents and vice presidents are purely ceremonial. It's just having a well-known person as a president or vice president. They had no influence over.
Fine.
But obviously they have soft power influence, because they're
Sure.
like, if you want us to be on your thing because people love us, you need to make some changes. But the president, the CEO and head of policy, don't have total. Though I think there's an element of, certainly I'd say in the case of the CEO, so Chris Sherwood, I think there is a certain amount of deflecting to the board, because they want a good charity career afterwards, and avoiding controversy and scandal is part of having a good charity career, to move from big charity to big charity. So I think if he was willing to die by the sword on this, he would have probably been able to do it.
Yeah, thanks. This is about coalitions in general, and I think you've all spoken about your opinion on that, but often they don't work well because maybe there's not enough autonomy and ownership for each partner beyond the kind of controlling, or maybe catalyst in this sense, partner. It seems like this campaign had more silos of works, organizations and individuals working to see sort of towards the same goal. Is that maybe a better approach? Because I think so often there isn't that main. Coalitions come together because orgs want to work on the same topic, but no one has the resource or necessary kind of resource, I think is the right word, to pull all of that together and be the leader of this. Is it because you all had like individual autonomy and resource to give to more like the collective goal that you think this one was so successful?
We all just had a lot of free time.
I would say that even if you do have a shared goal, coalitions don't always work. I think it's much more than having a shared goal, and I do think it comes. Working together is hard. Working together with people in your own organization is hard, let alone working with people in other organizations where there isn't like a CEO or somebody who's got that kind of authority. So I really think it really always for me comes back down to trust relationships. And there's a role which I've now learned is an actual role of weaving, of network weaving, of it's not just about the leader or the facilitator and all of the relationships with that one person. That's still very hierarchical. It's about weaving the relationships between everybody in that coalition. So I think there's the magic happens because of that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Nice to end on some magic there. Well, I would love you to thank all of the panels. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have too. So a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.